CNN projects that former Democratic Congresswoman and CIA case officer Abigail Spanberger will be elected the governor of Virginia, defeating the Commonwealth's sitting lieutenant governor, Republican Winsome Earl Sears.
Tonight, we sent a message.
Yes, it was history being made. First African-American senator, as well as the first female senator in DeSoto County.
New York, tonight you have delivered a mandate for change, a mandate for a new kind of politics, a mandate for a city we can afford, and a mandate for a government that delivers exactly that.
There was a massive blue wave on election night this week, with Democrats sweeping key races across the country. Now, the candidates ranged from Democratic Centrists to a Democratic Socialist, but their messages resonated with voters amid a turbulent time for the country and the Trump administration. There's an ongoing government shutdown, massive layoffs, and prices keep going up. Was this election a referendum on President Trump? What can Democrats and Republicans learn from this? And what's the path forward? But before we unpack all of that, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit subscribe. Joining me today to unpack all of this is SMU political science professor, Cal Jillson. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
I wanted to talk about, we obviously had an election here in Texas, and it went the way that I pretty much expected. But I really wanted to talk about the other races, what we saw nationwide. So Democrats swept key races. We saw Abigail Spanberger and Mikie Sherrill win governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey. Californians voted to redraw their congressional districts, and Governor Newsom said that was in direct response to what happened here in Texas. And then we saw in deeply red Mississippi, there were some wins on some legislative seats there. And in New York City, elected a Democratic Socialist in Zohran Mamdani. What do you think some key factors that drove voters to the polls were to give Democrats these key wins?
Yeah, I think that Donald Trump said years ago that he was going to make the Republicans get tired of winning. I think Democrats just got tired of losing and turned out in large numbers, much more energized than the Republicans were, with Trump not being on the ballot. Republican turnout seemed to fall and Democrat turnout seemed to rise here in Texas and around the country. So not only did Abigail Spanberger win the governorship in Texas, lieutenant governor and the attorney general offices were also taken by Democrats. And I think Democrats picked up 10 seats, maybe 11 or 12, even at the end of the day in the Virginia House of Burgesses, which is their lower house. And that had been very, very close. Democrats had a margin of just 1 or 2 seats. So they opened that up, giving them more control of Virginia politics. And then in New Jersey, that was polling as a very close race between Jack Ciattarelli, a 3-time Republican candidate for governor, and the Democrat who won by 15, not by 3. And so it was a very big win. And that sort of Democrat turnout, Democrat overperformance seemed to hold across the country. And so Democrats had a very good night.
And what I found interesting was the different messaging. There were Democrats who ran as centrist, and then you have Mamdani, who is running as a Democratic Socialist. And despite the way they relayed their message and their vision, it still broke through. What do you think they got right in terms of when they were speaking to voters and crafting what their message was going to be?
Yeah, they stuck to a more moderate tone in these 2 governors' races, and they focused on affordability, the cost of living, the rate of inflation still running at 3%, while people's income is not growing that rapidly in most cases, particularly the bottom half of the income structure. And so those two governors' races seem to be very effective. But Mamdani in New York also ran on affordability, even more focused on that topic than others were. And I think the fact that Mamdani won and moderates won in New Jersey and Virginia is really the key for Democrats. Democrats have to control their left wing so that Democrats are willing to see liberal, moderate Democrats across the board, from Mamdani down to Spanberger and into Mississippi, where you're going to get Democrats oftentimes that might not be quite as liberal as they are in other parts of the country. And so Republicans are going to try to pick Mamdani, as they did AOC in an earlier day, and as they did Hillary Clinton before that, and make that person the face of the Democratic Party. You can't let them do that. Democrats have to be open to different kinds of Democrats running in different kinds of districts where they're likely to be competitive.
What should, on the other side of that coin, what message should Republicans take away from the election results? Because a year ago, they had a blowout election, presidency, both houses of Congress. I mean, this is a stark difference in what we saw just a year ago. What do you think some of the key takeaways that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think that in 2024, the Republicans from Donald Trump on down were the outsiders. And it was the end of the Biden administration. Republicans were out of office, at least out of the White House. And so Donald Trump had been very successful running against Biden, Bidenomics, Biden inflation, rising cost of living, all of those kinds of issues. And Biden had to own those. Now Trump is in office, and he's been in office for a year. And so he can no longer say that difficult economic circumstances are Biden's fault. Now he has to own it. And voters looked at the last year and said, I don't feel any better than I did before. Before with Biden, I'm still seeing inflation. My expenses are rising. My income is not rising as fast. So it's hard to be in the White House and be in control of events when those events are not uniformly positive, which they were not for Donald Trump and the Republicans on Tuesday.
And after the election, Trump had said that one of the reasons why there was a loss, such a loss, was that one, his name wasn't on the ballot, and the shutdown. But it got me to thinking, when you're considering a president like Trump and the scenario that we're dealing with, government shutdown, inflation, massive layoffs, how much does his endorsement even help a candidate right now versus, hurt a candidate?
Yeah. I think, Donald Trump is right in one sense when he says, my name was not on the ballot, because Trump's name does rally Republicans. And when his name is not on the ballot, they tend to be less energized, turn out in lower numbers. And we saw that on Tuesday. But his name is not going to be on the ballot in 2026 either, in the upcoming midterm elections. So Republicans will have to find a way to energize themselves without him being on the ballot explicitly. And I think Donald Trump will take a larger role in the 2026 midterm elections than he did in these 2025 off-year elections. But I think it's also an interesting question to ask where Donald Trump can be useful and how useful he can be if inflation continues to be running higher than people are comfortable with, and if they don't see a fall in grocery prices that Donald Trump promised, and in other prices, there will still be places, red districts and states where Donald Trump will be welcome. He'll hold his big rallies, and he may even inspire some turnout there. But there are going to be other places where candidates on the Republican side will have to think long and hard about whether they want Trump in the district, and even whether they want to put Trump front and center and claim that they are MAGA Republicans. There'll be a lot of Republicans that will be unwilling to do that or very nervous about doing it in 2026.
You know, I've heard people ask, you know, is this election, was this a referendum on what he has done? How much of it was that on where he's taken the country, and how much of it was the makeup of when this election was held? And can Democrats take this momentum into the midterms? Yeah,
I think that, you know, Republicans are right to point out that these were elections held in blue states. Donald Trump lost both New Jersey and Virginia by 6 in 2024, but overperformed previous Republican election experiences, and did seem to pull in some younger voters, particularly some Hispanic and Black voters. Again, men more than women. But the Democrats overperformed previous Democrats, overperformed Kamala Harris in 2024 uniformly across the country. So they were reacting to Donald Trump's policies and his performance in office, from sinking boats out in the Caribbean and out in the Eastern Pacific, to tearing down the East Wing of the White House and claiming that he can set tariffs on the world at his personal discretion. A lot of Democrats were offended, scandalized by a lot of what Donald Trump did, and they turned out in large numbers. Carrying that through 2026 will be critical, because in off-year elections, congressional elections, the non-White House party tends to pick up on average 26 seats. All the Democrats need is 3. If they picked up a dozen, let alone 15 on the way to 26, that would be great. But there are reasons to believe that with the changes in redistricting, with the fewer number of toss-up seats for the U.S. House of Representatives, that there are actually probably only low teens of actual competitive seats. And so the Democrats will need to take most of those to create any kind of margin in the House. Because when Pelosi was Speaker, she had a margin of 4 or 5 Democrats, but she could run her Democratic caucus with those narrow margins. Republicans with narrow margins have more difficulty because the Freedom Caucus is hard to manage. So Democrats would love to have 10, 12, a margin that can let you lose a couple of your fringe members and still pass a bill. So we'll see whether they can maintain enthusiasm. And Republicans, having seen what happened on Tuesday, are going to say, all right, now we're going to have to gear up too. We're going to have to match Democrat enthusiasm, or we're going to get swept in 2026.
I was thinking about, I had seen a couple of reports in different states about the change in the Hispanic vote this time around. And it got me thinking about the makeup here in Texas. The GOP had redrawn our congressional districts. And I was wondering if a lot of that was based on the gains that they made with the Hispanic community. If that continues to change, that could change the outcome even of when that new map kicks in. Because
I think that Donald Trump in 2024, with his focus on jobs and the criticism of the Biden administration that he was killing jobs, particularly on the border, but in general losing manufacturing jobs Trump could turn that around. Many Black and Hispanic workers are working class, middle class workers whose job is critical to them. And schools and healthcare are also critical to their families. And they thought Trump would be better at defending jobs and growing incomes. And so historically, Democratic voters voted for Trump in 2024, but now they're not particularly satisfied with the results of the Trump administration in the first year, and they swung back toward the Democrats on Tuesday in New Jersey, well, really across the country, and Hispanic men, Black men to a lesser degree, moved back to the Democrats. Black and Hispanic women had not changed very much in 2024. They stayed home with the Democrats. But I think that the districts in South Texas that were crafted based on the fact that Trump did better in 2024 among Hispanics, I think Democrats are going to have a good chance of holding those. Henry Cuellar in particular is, 20, 24, 25-year Democrat incumbent. He's won close races many times. He's embedded in his district, deep roots. And so I think, he's up on his tiptoes. He knows that he's got to fight. But I think if anyone can hold a district that's been redrawn, it'd be him. And then Gonzalez in the next district over. Less experience. And so, if one survived and one didn't, I would bet on Cuellar. But it's possible that both of them survive, and Republicans only pick up 3 seats in Texas, which would cause great chagrin for them, because I think the California seats have been drawn in such a way as to pick up at least that many, and maybe all the way to 5.
Another thing that I was thinking about with the going over to New York City and Mamdani's win is I remember Trump had threatened to withhold federal funding if New York City residents elected him. And I thought about some of those congressional Republicans in New York and how that would work out for them. If something like that were to happen, he would still be hurting some people in his own party because they're having to answer to some of that. What type of battle is that politically?
And I think he doesn't think about that. He's more interested in punishing people that he think offended him. But Staten Island is capable of electing a Republican House member. If you get out of New York up into those Connecticut suburbs and around down into the New Jersey suburbs, you have Republicans that are elected in those districts. And those districts in northern New Jersey feed into Manhattan. And the ease of getting into Manhattan, either from the north or from the west, is of concern to a lot of Republicans. A lot of those people who work in finance in Manhattan come from outside of Manhattan, and they care a lot about ease of access. So I think when you think about Mamdani's election and the turnout of young people and him winning 70% of that vote, Trump did better among younger men in 2024. But many of those young men that like Trump's beefy bluster also like Mamdani's relatability. And so, to punch in the face the guy that these young voters just selected is going to offend them as they think about what to do in 2026. So, I think Trump is much better at punishment than he is at making friends. And in politics, you usually win by addition, not subtraction.
Right. And, on that note, in terms of just like the style and all of that, I'm sure Democrats will be and Republicans, but I'm going to stick with the Democrats first. Like they're going to be talking about what their messaging is going into the midterms. Should they stick with the being moderate, like Spanberger and Sherrill, or go with populist progressivism, like democratic socialism of Mamdani. How do you see that shaping up in terms of them getting their messaging together, or should they just do what works depending on the region, the area?
The latter, if at all possible. It used to be that people talked about American political parties, Democrat and Republican, but particularly Democrat, as big tent parties with the flaps on the side of the tent up, so anyone who wants to come in, politics by addition, can come into your political party and be welcome. It was always the case that some constituencies were more core and others were new to the party, but you wanted as many people in your party as you could get. Polarization has made both political parties more ideologically consistent. So Democrats, center left and moving left, Republicans, center right, even moving far right. There's currently a fight on the Republican side between Tucker Carlson.
Yes, I have been reading about that.
Who had Fuentes, the white nationalist, in for a long interview, and lots of Republicans are saying no, we don't want white nationalism, and the head of the National Review, a major right-wing opinion magazine, said we got to stick with Tucker. So there's a lot of fighting about how far right you go, similar to how far left you go on the Democrat side. But if the Democrats could steel themselves a little bit to that big tent party philosophy that you want a nominee who could win in the district he's nominated in, right? And so winning in Georgia is different than winning in Connecticut or out in Oregon. So you've got to have candidates that fit their district, and you can't criticize a candidate in a moderate district if he's not completely down the line on LGBTQ issues, because he can't talk about that in the same way you can in Stamford, Connecticut.
Right. And you know, sticking with the messaging, I'd seen an article about President Trump's meeting with Senate Republicans. I think it was the next day. I think they had some breakfast.
Right.
And there was reports that he said, and I'll read the quote: "The election results prove that the government shutdown has been worse for us than for Democrats, and Republicans are getting killed out there, election-wise." That's a stark difference from what we're hearing from Speaker Mike Johnson when he comes out and he's saying something completely different and saying this was a Democrats' shutdown. You know, he's trying to stay on message with that.
Yeah.
But, and I was wondering about the disconnect there in terms of them continue on those lines of the messaging when it's polling is showing that Americans aren't buying that, but they seem to want to stick with that. And then privately, Trump is telling Senate Republicans, this is where the shutdown is worse for them.
Yeah. The polling has shown from the very beginning of the shutdown to yesterday, a 10-point gap, with more people blaming Republicans than blaming Democrats. And so, you know, most Republicans blame Democrats and most Democrats blame Republicans, but the independents are breaking against the Republicans, not only in this, but in the polling on the elections and the polls coming out of those elections. So the Democrats who succeeded on economic and affordability themes and issues. And Donald Trump, in that breakfast the day after the election, said, we got to start talking about that more. The problem for him is that he's president and his policies are being evaluated and found to have fallen short in bringing down prices on staples like groceries and gas and other things that people buy every day and see and react to. So the fact that he could use these economic issues when he was out of office criticizing Biden and can't use them as effectively now because he's in office and responsible for the results, or at least being held responsible by a big chunk of the public, is a puzzle they're going to have to solve. going forward toward 2026, because Democrats are the ones who now have the opportunity to say, he's tried, he hasn't succeeded, we have a plan, vote for us. And he's got to not only say, my plan is working, here's what I'm going to do in addition. But if people don't think the plan is working, that's a tough sell.
And it seems like, just to kind of, wrap everything up, it's on that note, it seems as if Trump and the Republicans have kind of put themselves in a self-created trap, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's when you think about being in power, and you've been in power for a year, you passed the big, beautiful bill. It had many components that included your economic policy program. And you still have rising prices and inflation. And the country lost 1 million jobs, 1 million layoffs last year. You've got to explain that. But if you're out of power, all you have to say is, that's not good and I could do better, right? You always want to be that guy who's not responsible for current results, but who has a plan to make things better down the road. Much easier to promise than to be judged on your accomplishments.
That is absolutely right. And with that, as always, you've given us some great information to take in and glean from what we saw during election night this week. And again, thank you for stopping by to talk to me. And it's always a great conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
And for all of you at home, again, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit subscribe.